Well, hello, amazing, gorgeous you. Have you ever thought it's possible to have a trauma program in your church, but thought it's too complicated? You are not going to believe how simple it can be. We are going to talk to Pastor Sonia today. She's a pastor in a church with tens and tens and tens of thousands of members. And she very simply started a trauma program while she was still struggling with her own trauma. And now it has exploded. You are going to find so much hope, so much help, both from her story and from how God is using her. So I can't wait for you to hear this inspiring story with Pastor Sonia. Well, hello, amazing, gorgeous you. I'm so excited because we have Pastor Sonia Piotr, who is with us today. And she actually is a pastor in a huge church. And she has begun to develop or has developed a trauma program within her church. And I love it because she's made it simple, not complicated. She's used resources that are out there. And we're going to talk about how to help the trauma sick in your local church. So please, we're so excited to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Super excited to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And I know every time we've talked, I've been so excited about what you're doing. And I know I wanted to have you on the podcast and we've been trying to schedule it. And I'm really excited that this is hitting in December because my thought is maybe someone's going to say, hey, we need to do this in the new year, a new you in 22. So can you tell us a little bit about how this all got started in your church and tell us a little bit about your church as well, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So I serve at Victory World Church, has a multi-campus ministry in Atlanta. And so I started being part of their team there about maybe 10 years ago or so. But the trauma care ministry started about 4 years ago. After one of our pastors, who's now our senior pastor, preached on depression and anxiety. And it was, it was a topic that definitely hit the core of a lot of people. And so to provide support for those people, we created, the groups and started in group form so that there could be community as we went through a curriculum together. And so, at the point, though, that I started this program, I was going through my own depression, though. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting how the Lord works and how He uses, even our own pain to start something to help the pain of other people. I had started to sort of go into a descent of my own childhood trauma that I thought I was already healed because, got saved and delivered. So I thought, okay, so my childhood trauma is over and done with. And I grew up with abusive, alcoholic parents, addicts, and lots of violence, and went from the orphanage to my parents several times in my childhood. So it was a very chaotic, very abusive, violent, sexual abuse, all kinds of stuff. And so I thought when I got saved, all of that was just going to be erased and it was magic. But then, when 4 years ago is when I just started a descent. There was a descent for me, and it really is like a descent because I'm up here, and then I'm thinking everything's good, and then I start to go down.
Yeah, you start to feel the feelings of your life, right?
Yes. It really, for me, it felt like I'm falling, into this abyss.
Oh my gosh, I relate to that so much. I was terrified of that because I had felt that so many times in my life. And it took me a long time to realize that it's actually just feeling the feelings of my life. And once I feel them and process them and go through healing, I won't always feel that way.
Exactly. And see, but we don't know that when it's happening.
Yes.
And so that's why some of these, these ministries are so important to have in your church, because when we're going to go through these things in life. And when we do go through them, it's so important to have safe community. As you know, Dr. Barbara, safety is the foundation for any healing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we get to be a part. Exactly. We get to be a part of creating safety alongside what the Lord wants to do in the lives of people.
Yes.
And so,
I mean, God said very early on, it's not good for people to be alone, and it hasn't changed.
Exactly. But evil would want to isolate us. And that's exactly what begins to happen. And that's what happened for me as well, is when we begin to feel like something's pulling us back into a terrifying place that we don't want to go into. We began to fall into isolation. And it's not something conscious. It just happens. It's a subconscious thing. Our mechanisms kick in. And so in the midst of this is when that door of opportunity opened for me to begin to create. And in a very just a sacred, God has sacred ways and that really are mysterious. But in the midst of that, he calls me to create this ministry, and building that ministry created some grounding for me. So the building of it itself provided purpose for me at my core. And that helped me to begin a journey, which I'm still on, of deep healing.
Now, has there been any place where you've gone in your healing process where you've discovered he is not there? Or have you encountered him in those places?
There is no place, no matter how dark. I mean, and it can get dark, as you yourself know, Dr. Barbara. It can get very dark. There's no place where the Lord has not met me with compassion and with tenderness, and with an unconditional love.
Yes.
Yeah. There's no place.
He is so good.
It is so good. And that safety, the safety that we crave for, that we long for, that visceral presence, that we long for. Our body, our soul, our spirit longs to have this visceral, like in my gut, in my heart, connection, with the Lord. And as I have descended into this childhood hell that I spent my entire life running from, and hoped that it was something I would never have to revisit again, found him there. I found him there in that hell's place.
What fruit, Pastor Sonia, has it borne out in your life to revisit? Because I do think there's this attitude of forgetting what lies behind and pressing forward to what lies ahead. And yet God is outside of time, and Psalm 139 reveals him visiting us in all different time zones of our lives.
He's not bound by time.
Yeah. So what is the fruit of working on this?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And again, I'm still on this journey. So I don't want people to think, oh, this is one thing that I did and it's over. I've realized I'm going to be forever until I get home to Jesus. That's how I see it. I'm going to be healing. But
same.
Right. Because I think that when we encounter trauma, and there's different levels of trauma, but when we encounter and we are impacted by that, it can really hit us in core places.
Yes.
And so for me, what I'm receiving in this journey is the safety that I didn't have as a child in a violent home. And so when
attachment.
Yes, exactly. The attachment, that secure attachment, that safety that I needed when I was like 5 or 6 or 10, that I didn't have at that age. And as I revisit some of those things with Jesus, he is able to supernaturally deposit that safety, that secure attachment in those stories. of my
Yes,
life.
yes, because he is outside of time, and memory
Mm-hmm.
reconstitutes each time. And when we have an encounter with him in a memory, and he is outside of time, so he's able to go there with us, and then he deposits something in our implicit memory, our felt sense, even in our sensory sense of who we are, that changes how we experience life, so that we can have what the world might say is impossible. I mean, we know a lot about trauma
Yes.
healing, and so there's a lot that we can get to, but with him, all things are possible, because he is the God of the encounter. And we see how, like, even the Samaritan woman who had been through, women couldn't divorce back then. So the fact that she had 5 husbands, to me, means she's had a lifetime of rejection. Yet an encounter with Jesus changed her, transformed her 100%, to where she was seen as equal to the apostles in church history. And so he transforms us. Now, I would love to know how you began to develop this in your church, even when you were hurting. That's pretty amazing. And it sounds like it would be complicated, but I happen to know that you actually used resources that were already out there.
Exactly.
Can you talk about that?
Yes.
Because I think people think, I don't know what to do. This is complicated.
Right. And you can absolutely, we can absolutely feel, if you're a leader, if you're a volunteer working at a church, or even if you're on staff, the word trauma doesn't even ever get enunciated by pastors. Like it's very rare that I hear a pastor actually talking about trauma, the word, like, even to say that word, or depression. So I think that it's easy for us to feel sort of intimidated, like, oh no, I have to be a trauma specialist, or I have to be a doctor or a therapist. But let me just say, you don't have to be any of those things. If that is in your heart to start a trauma care ministry at your church, you can absolutely do it. You don't need to be a therapist or a doctor. Really, I would encourage you to think about, what are the books that you have read in your own life that you have found meaningful, simple, meaningful, and that really brought healing.
Yeah.
And I would start there. I would start with, what brought healing to your core? And then why don't you invite a few of your friends to sort of do a trial run together, and let's do this for like 10 weeks and meet together and read each chapter together, and then come together and talk about it, and so, it can be just as simple as that. There's so many good books right now. Obviously, Dr. Barbara, you have amazing, Bible studies and programs and stuff that you've already put together. And it's as simple as going on your website, signing up for something with your friends, and sort of giving that a little trial run and see, like, what are we thinking? How do we feel as we go through this together? And then once you finish that trial run with your friends, 2 or 3 friends, that you decide, hey, what if we invite a few of the group members into this, and obviously check with your pastor and things like that.
Yes.
But it's really not, it doesn't have to be difficult. Now, of course, trauma, health is this amazing. I am a trauma care, focused, trauma care informed minister. And so when I look into that field, it is like this Grand Canyon. It's beautiful, and it is mysterious, and it is vast. So I'm not going to tell you that that's simple, because it's not. But if you're a minister, a volunteer, a staff leader in your church, it can be just as simple as, think about, what are the books you've read that have brought healing to you? Invite a couple of friends to do it with you, and then invite a few other people at the church to do it with you.
I love that. We also at Dr. Barbara Ministries have the Hearts Returning Home Institute, where we're beginning to teach people how to heal the trauma sick. And we have a certification process that we're developing. That's a series of 10 levels of certification. And then the first class is an intro class, but you can get a lot even from that intro class. Our Hearts Returning Home Institute class 101, how to healing the trauma sick. And so you can go to drbarbaralowe.com/contact, get on my email list, and so that you can find out when we are opening up more classes in January, because we're going to be opening those. Now, I would love to hear what is in place at your church and what has been in place, because you've followed this blueprint. I really love that you say start small, make sure that you have the container for it, like kind of like that social, that emotional, container, because you have a feeling for what you can hold and what you can't hold as you walk through on a small scale.
Absolutely.
Example,
And that's,
I've done a breakthrough intensive kind of dynamic with 10 or 11 or 12 women in my house, where I took them all through an intensive weekend. Well, now I'm going to be doing the World Women's Wholeness Summit this March in 2022. I'm going to take 400 women through a process where I also have other speakers coming in. So you kind of grow in your ability to take people through a process and hold the container of that room in that space. But I started out with one, where I spent days with them, then 12, and now I'm jumping to 400 with a little help from some of my friends.
Yes. And I love that. And thank you for saying that, Dr. Barbara, because I do think that you do grow in your capacity. Like I have grown in my own capacity so much, from 4 years ago, when I really started to no longer want to run from my own childhood stories of terror, and began to really face some of that again, little by little, with the Lord, with safe people. Like, don't do that by yourself. But as I began to do that with a safe person, with the Spirit of God, that itself started to grow my capacity to where I started, by doing this trial run with a few of the lay leaders at the church. And we did that for 15 weeks. So that was our first sort of like pilot. And then after that, then I had taken, so that was about 10, maybe of the 10 of the lay leaders. And then after we were done, they were we had all been changed together to another level. And we all wanted it. Now we can all do our own group. And so that's how that started, so I invited about 10 lay leaders that I knew, some of even were part of staff who had a little bit of time to give maybe 2 hours in the evening once a week. We all went through this book together. And then after we were done, we invited and we let the church know that we had a capacity for about 8 people per group. And so, so even then, so we started with one group, but then from that group came 5 more groups. And then from those 5 groups, it kept multiplying to then 10 groups. And so now we have about 35, 40 trauma care groups of all kinds, not just, so we have depression. Yes, we have depression and anxiety.
These are all like book studies.
Yes, they are book studies.
I love it.
So yes, because again, it's simple. We don't want to make it complicated. I do obviously encourage all the leaders, the lay leaders, anybody that's wanting to lead a group of this kind. This is not just a small group. It is a healing group. It is a care group. So there needs to be special tenderness that we take. And so, of course, like I said, I think, as the minister themselves begins to do their own work, then our own capacity to be a safer person is going to increase. And the more safe we become, the more of a container that we can create, or different containers. And so that's how that process started. And then it just kept multiplying. And so now we have groups for post-abortive, women, we have depression and anxiety, we have story groups for trauma, groups to help people who are going through divorce or grief. And we want to continue to grow all kinds of trauma care, all kinds of, ways to walk with the brokenhearted, because
Oh,
it's through that Jesus heals. And
yes.
and I'll tell you, Dr. Barbara, it's something that I have found fascinating that I have not seen anywhere else but through the trauma care ministry is the countenance of people changes through
Oh,
this process.
so beautiful.
Isn't
When
that amazing?
oh, that was so good. Hey, are you wanting to either get your own trauma healed or be a part of a trauma healing program? Go to drbarbaralow.com/book a call, and we will get you to a phone call with one of our team members, and we will help you get into the right program, whether it be healing the trauma sick or getting your own healing for your own trauma sickness, or both. We love you. We're here for you. This is what God has called us to do, and we are here to help you heal and be equipped. All right. I love you and we look forward to part 2 of this. Part 2 is just as good. So I'll see you next week in part 2.